For years, one door at Neverland stood sealed, but when it finally opened, what lay beyond wasn't what anyone expected. After Michael Jackson's passing in 2009, the magic of Neverland Ranch faded almost overnight. The gates that once welcomed thousands now stood silent, their golden arches tarnished by time and neglect. The whimsical melodies that once spilled over the sprawling hills were replaced with a heavy, eerie stillness. The carousel that spun endlessly beneath California's sun froze in place, its painted horses cracked and weather-worn. The laughter of children, once carried on the wind, had dissolved into faint echoes. The menagerie of exotic animals, once roaming proudly through carefully manicured gardens, was gone, cages emptied, enclosures left to rot. Weeds grew wild over the paths where Michael once danced barefoot at midnight. The shimmering lake darkened, no longer reflecting the carnival lights that once crowned it. Even the mansion itself, that grand, glittering palace of dreams, seemed to sigh under the weight of abandonment. Neverland had become less a home and more a mausoleum of memories, its heartbeat silenced. Yet, within this desolate wonderland, whispers persisted of something untouched, something no one dared to open. Tucked behind the main house, obscured by ivy and shadow, there was a garage. But this was no ordinary garage. Estate workers spoke of it in hushed tones, as though it carried a power they couldn't name. Even as legal battles raged and estate sales stripped Neverland of its treasures, this single structure remained untouched. Its door, thick and reinforced, bore no windows, no markings, only a faint glint of rust where the lock sat stubbornly. Over time, stories swirled about what lay beyond that door. Some claimed it was Michael's sanctuary, a place where his most cherished memories were kept, too painful to part with. Others said it was filled with vehicles so rare and customized that even his family had never seen them. And then, there were darker tales, suggesting it held unreleased music, confidential journals, or evidence of the scandals that shadowed his life. Nobody knew the truth because nobody had ever opened it. The garage became an obsession for some, a symbol of all that Michael kept hidden, even from those closest to him. Reporters tried to gain access over the years, but they were denied at every turn. It stood there, year after year, defying time and curiosity alike. But as the world moved on, one locked door kept Michael's spirit alive, waiting for the day it would finally open. To understand the garage, you must first understand the man who hid it. Michael Jackson was a spectacle the world could never stop watching. A figure so dazzling that even the smallest movements sparked headlines. Every stage he graced became a battlefield of brilliance, moonwalking into history, shattering records, and leaving audiences gasping for more. But with that brilliance came an unrelenting light that burned through every layer of his existence. Every breath, every glance, every choice was scrutinized, dissected, and displayed. The adoration of millions was matched by the merciless curiosity of a world that refused to let him simply live. Yet behind the rhinestones and the choreographed perfection, there existed a man few truly knew, a man deeply sensitive, meticulous to a fault, and desperate for spaces that belonged only to him. In public, he was larger than life, but in private, he sought silence, searching for slivers of normalcy the world never allowed him to touch. Insiders spoke of his exacting nature, how every note, every move, every detail had to meet the impossible standards he set for himself. They described a man who craved control because the rest of his life was chaos. It was in this delicate balance of spectacle and solitude that the garage came to life. While others might have seen it as a simple storage space, for Michael, it became a refuge, a sanctuary where no cameras intruded and no demands followed. Within its sealed walls, he could shed the crown of pop royalty and simply exist. Each corner, each item preserved, there was chosen with care, representing not the king of pop the world demanded, but Michael, the man no one truly understood. Those closest to him often remarked how fiercely he guarded his sanctuaries. They knew better than to disturb him when he slipped into those spaces, knowing they were sacred. One confidant revealed he would retreat into his private world for hours, sometimes days, finding peace among the things that gave him comfort, the quiet machinery of his passions, the symbols of who he was beyond fame. Another recalled how he would sit in the garage, not saying a word, letting the silence envelop him like armor. The garage was more than just steel and concrete. It was a line he drew between the spectacle and the soul, a boundary he refused to let the outside world cross. Inside, he curated his story on his own terms, away from the flashbulbs, away from judgment, away from everything that tore at him. And yet, no one could have guessed just how much of Michael remained hidden behind that door. When the order came to open everything, the garage refused to let go of its secrets easily. By 2024, the long-sleeping estate of Michael Jackson was thrust into the spotlight once more. This time not by choice, but by mandate. A sweeping legal audit descended on the property like a storm, demanding that every square inch of Neverland be catalogued, inventoried, and valued. The intent was simple: to account for the estate's remaining assets in the wake of mounting claims and shifting ownership. But buried in the list of locked rooms and forgotten spaces was one final entry that would soon grip everyone's attention: a single, sealed garage that no one dared approach for 15 years. As officials combed the grounds, the garage became the focus of growing unease. Some employees spoke of it with nervous laughter, others with reverent silence. But when the auditors demanded its door open, their detached professionalism began to falter. It wasn't just locked, it was fortified, reinforced in ways that defied reason for what was assumed to be a storage shed. When locksmiths were summoned, they expected a stubborn deadbolt. What they found was a slab of metal that hummed with defiance. The door's surface bore faint scars from past attempts, though no one could say who might have tried. The frame was made of a titanium steel alloy, dense and unyielding. Even the keypad, once glowing faintly above the handle, now hung dark and unresponsive, its circuitry fried by time, or perhaps by some deliberate failsafe. The bolts embedded in the frame refused to budge, as though welded shut by more than just rust. Tools that cracked bank vaults failed to make a dent here. Crowbars bent. Advanced cutters sparked and died. It became clear that this door wasn't meant to be opened not by just anyone. Frustration mounted with each passing hour, as experts whispered among themselves, baffled and increasingly wary of what they might uncover if the door ever did give way. Outside, the tension thickened, every failed attempt feeding into the myths that already clung to this place. Was this the fortress of his most guarded treasures, or something darker entirely? What could possibly be inside that warranted such obsessive protection? At last, after hours of relentless grinding, sparks and smoke began to curl from the edges of the lock. The air crackled with a strange electricity, and the door shuddered under the weight of its own resistance. With a final, wrenching scream of metal, the bolts surrendered, and the slab swung free, releasing a breath of stale air that seemed to carry the weight of everything Michael had left behind. With a deafening creak, the past opened and the world held its breath. Inside lay a scene so pristine it was as if time itself had stopped in 2009. The heavy air, stale and untouched, wrapped around a collection so unexpected it left the room breathless. As the darkness lifted under the sharp beams of flashlights, rows of gleaming vehicles emerged from the shadows, lined up in perfect order, untouched by dust or decay. Each car shimmered faintly, as though waiting patiently for their master to return and turn the key. It was impossible to imagine that they had been sealed away for over a decade, for they stood in immaculate condition, spotless, silent, yet alive with memory. What revealed itself was not just a garage of automobiles but an extraordinary gallery of dreams on wheels. Classic Rolls-Royces rested beside sleek sports cars, their curves timeless and elegant. Bizarre, one-of-a-kind designs caught the eye, vehicles that bore impossible flourishes and impossible stories, each with its own tale of indulgence and vision. Among them were custom interiors, so intricate they seemed like private works of art, embroidery stitched with initials, seats lined with lyrics, door panels painted with delicate motifs echoing his songs and his soul. Every detail spoke to a man who could never settle for the ordinary, a man who built his world as meticulously as he built his music. On the far wall, illuminated faintly in the muted glow, words in faded gold script whispered a message: "Drive your dreams." The phrase felt less like a decoration, and more like a declaration of a mantra that had guided his journey through fame and turmoil alike. This was not simply a place to keep his cars. This was his sanctuary, his personal shrine where passion met peace. The stillness inside suggested reverence, the kind of silence reserved for chapels and confessionals. Every surface, every curve, every stitch was a testament to his relentless creativity and the need to craft a world that was entirely his own. Here, behind this once impenetrable door, the garage stood not as a mere storage space but as a mirror of his life, glittering, guarded, and aching with the weight of untold stories. One couldn't help but feel the quiet pride that must have come with each vehicle, and yet also the quiet loneliness of knowing no one else truly understood what they meant to him. Together, they painted a picture of a man who sought beauty in every corner and insisted on preserving it, even if only for himself. But among these gleaming artifacts, one car stood apart, a turquoise Rolls-Royce that began it all. The car that marked the start of Michael's private empire revealed more than horsepower. It revealed a man. At the center of the garage, gleaming even through the dim light, sat the 1,985 Rolls-Royce Cornish, finished in a striking turquoise that seemed to defy the silence surrounding it. This wasn't just his first luxury car, purchased in the midst of his thriller-era dominance. It was the first tangible expression of a deeper need, something beyond fame, beyond money. To many, it might have appeared as another status symbol, another trophy from a man who already had everything. But to Michael, it was something altogether different, a sanctuary. While the world believed he thrived on crowds and applause, the Cornish told another story. Staff who worked at Neverland remembered the quiet nights when the gates were locked, and Michael would slip away into this car. He didn't drive fast. He didn't blast the radio. He simply sat in the driver's seat, motionless, sometimes for hours, letting the soft hum of the engine and the muted world outside offer him a kind of fragile peace. Inside those leather-lined doors, the chaos of his life fell away. There was no scrutiny, no flashbulbs, no accusations. There was only the steady rhythm of his breath and the comforting silence that wrapped around him like armor. The dashboard of the Cornish still bore traces of his solitude. Wedged into the cassette deck was a worn tape, labeled in faded ink, "She's Out of My Life." The song, raw and aching with vulnerability, played on loop so often that staff could hum it from memory. It wasn't just a melody to him, it was a confession, a reminder of what fame demanded and what it took away. Those who glimpsed him through the windshield spoke of a man not rehearsing or performing, but reflecting, staring into the middle distance, as though trying to find himself among the noise. This turquoise Rolls-Royce became more than a car. It became a cocoon, a place where he could reclaim control over a life that rarely felt like his own. The Cornish was where he brought his unfinished demos to listen in solitude, where he scribbled notes to himself on scraps of paper, where he allowed himself to feel what the rest of the world would never see. For Michael, it was never about the horsepower beneath the hood or the gleaming chrome on the grille. It was about the quiet it offered when everything else demanded his voice. And yet, deeper in the garage, more layers of Michael's identity awaited. The deeper you went, the clearer it became these cars weren't just vehicles, they were armor. Each one lined up in that silent garage spoke not only of Michael's evolving tastes but of his shifting state of mind. From a young star ablaze with joy to a man retreating behind walls of steel and tinted glass. The longer you looked, the more obvious it was. This was not a showroom. It was a chronicle of his rising fame, growing isolation, and relentless search for safety in a world that never stopped closing in. There, gleaming under the faint light, stood the Mercedes 500 SEL, a car whose very design spoke of paranoia and resilience. Outfitted with factory-installed bulletproof windows and reinforced panels, it wasn't simply a car, it was a fortress on wheels. Its whisper-quiet engine was less about luxury and more about slipping away unnoticed, gliding through chaos without attracting more. This was the vehicle that carried him through the most brutal years, when accusations and betrayals threatened to crush him, when even walking outside risked an ambush. The Mercedes whispered of a man who had learned that applause could turn to arrows overnight. Next to it, a limousine stretched the length of the room, its presence commanding yet understated a masterclass in quiet opulence. Inside, the star-studded ceiling, hidden speakers, and retractable moonroof weren't just extravagances. They were a shield of serenity in the midst of relentless expectation. It was within these walls that he could recline into darkness, watch the fiber-optic stars glow above him, and finally breathe without 1,000 eyes prying into his solitude. This was not for the cameras. It was his moving sanctuary, where he could escape not into silence but into the kind of peace no stage could offer. But then came the Phantom 6, the crown jewel of his fortress. Cloaked in matte black with no rear windows, it was as if it had been designed to erase its occupant from the world. The internal screens inside its rear cabin suggested not just a desire for privacy, but a need to monitor from the shadows, to exist unseen yet ever vigilant. This was no longer just luxury. It was paranoia. It was a statement. The man who once wanted to be seen now sought invisibility. Every choice spoke of a person who had learned to fear what others might bring to his door, and who decided he would rather hide than risk being wounded again. Together, these cars told a haunting story of his transformation from the boy who chased applause to the man who sought escape. They were not just vehicles, they were layers of protection, crafted by a man who knew the cost of fame all too well. But even these fortresses couldn't hide what was tucked in a dark corner, something no one expected to find. Amid all the grandeur lay a plain, beige van whose secrets were anything but ordinary. Wedged inconspicuously in the far corner of the garage, the 1993 Ford Econoline looked laughably out of place among the Rolls-Royces, limousines, and armored phantoms. Its modest exterior, unmarked and colorless, seemed almost defiant in its simplicity. At first glance, one might have thought it nothing more than a service vehicle, perhaps a relic of a bygone tour or an overlooked staff transport. But when the door was finally pried open, the truth inside shattered that illusion completely. The moment the sliding door creaked aside, the atmosphere shifted. Instead of worn upholstery and the scent of neglect, the interior revealed a world so unexpected it left everyone silent. The walls were draped in rich, velvet, muffling sound, creating a quiet cocoon. The leather seats, deeply cushioned and meticulously maintained, reclined like thrones. Each seat had its own television screen embedded in the panel before it, and in the center console sat a gleaming Super Nintendo system, its cartridges still neatly stacked in a compartment as if waiting for him to pick up where he left off. Above it all, a mirror ceiling reflected the space below, creating the illusion of a room without limits, a surreal sanctuary rolling quietly through the world. But it wasn't only the van's decadence that shocked them. Tucked inside its hidden compartments lay sketches on delicate paper, intricate stage designs, scribbled lyrics, and outlines of a children's book he had once envisioned but never completed. The storyboards bore the unmistakable touch of his imagination, whimsical yet lonely, hopeful yet fragile. Even here, surrounded by luxury, the van betrayed something deeper, a creative mind that refused to rest, always dreaming, always planning, even when the world gave him no peace. This van revealed a side of Michael that was often eclipsed by the noise of his fame, the childlike wonder that still lingered in his heart. It spoke of a man who, even in his most guarded moments, found solace in imagining new worlds, building stories that no one else could see. The leather, the velvet, the games, the quiet was not indulgence, it was refuge. In the midst of scandal and scrutiny, he still carved out spaces where he could simply dream. And standing before it, you couldn't help but understand that this unassuming vehicle carried the essence of Michael, far more than any jeweled limousine ever could. This was not the King of Pop's van, this was Michael's. But the van wasn't the only unexpected discovery. The garage held even more hidden visions. Beyond the cars and van lay crates filled with dreams that never came to life. Stacked neatly along the back wall, cloaked in dust, but marked with the unmistakable gold MJJ Productions logo, these crates seemed at first like nothing more than forgotten props from a career already immortalized. But when they were pried open, what spilled out was not just memorabilia, it was a revelation. Inside were blueprints and plans for shows that never happened, tours that never took the stage, and visions of performances so ambitious they felt more like prophecy than entertainment. Among the documents lay a thick binder titled History 2, The Resurrection Tour. The very name was enough to stop hearts. Flipping through the pages revealed something staggering. A show designed to eclipse even the groundbreaking History World Tour, incorporating technology and ideas decades ahead of their time. The designs imagined stadiums transformed into immersive environments, with entire sections of audiences becoming part of the stage itself. Moving platforms, holographic illusions, and interactive moments where the crowd shaped the spectacle in real time. Every detail bore Michael's handwriting, his notes scrawled in the margins pushing for more, demanding perfection, refusing to settle. It became painfully clear that these weren't discarded ideas. They were the map of a man who could never stop creating, who saw no finish line, no ceiling to what he could give the world. Even in silence, his mind roared with invention. One sheet depicted a levitating stage that would carry him above the crowd while the stadium erupted in coordinated lights, a breathtaking ambition no engineer of the time could yet build. Another blueprint proposed a finale in which an entire stadium floor would blossom into a glowing field of stars as he sang, a living constellation beneath his feet. This was more than innovation. It was an obsession, It was a testament to a man who never saw the impossible as a reason to stop, only as a challenge to conquer. And yet these dreams never left the paper. The crates became tombs for ideas too grand, or perhaps too dangerous, to be realized. They whispered of the burden of genius that haunting needs to keep building worlds even as the weight of the one you're already carrying crushes you. In the end, the garage was more than just a hiding place for luxury and nostalgia. It was a vault of unfulfilled ambition, a quiet cathedral where genius still echoed, unfinished yet undiminished. Michael Jackson, even in absence, was still speaking through these plans, still daring to imagine beyond what the world could comprehend. And when word of these discoveries reached the world, reactions revealed just how deeply Michael's story still resonates. When the world saw what was inside, they understood this wasn't just a garage. It was Michael's heart, hidden in chrome and silence. News of the discovery swept quietly at first, then surged into headlines, sparking awe among collectors, scholars, and fans alike. Auction houses began circling, discreetly submitting staggering offers to acquire even a single piece from the collection. Exhibitions were proposed with promises to honor the legacy while revealing the unseen. Historians called it a rare cultural archive. Fans called it a miracle. But for those closest to him, it was something far more profound. It was the final truth of who he really was, preserved in steel and velvet. And the estate, despite the tidal wave of attention and unimaginable sums on the table, made its decision quickly. Not one item would leave. Not one artifact would be sold, parceled, or displayed for spectacle. The garage would remain intact, sealed with dignity, and catalogued as a monument to his humanity rather than a commodity. It was not a treasure trove to be divided, but a sanctuary to be protected. Even in death, Michael was still guarding himself from the insatiable gaze of the world. Looking at the cars now, one could see the story they told without a single word. The turquoise Rolls-Royce shimmered as the symbol of his ascension, a young man stepping into greatness, hopeful and unguarded, believing in the beauty of his own dreams. The Phantom 6, black and impenetrable, stood at the opposite end of the journey, a fortress for a man who no longer wanted to be seen, who had learned that fame could wound deeper than he ever imagined. And between them stretched every chapter in between, lined up in silence, each carrying its weight of joy, pain, retreat, and resilience. Together, they composed a portrait of a man more complex than the legend would ever admit. The garage itself became more than a room. It became a sacred tribute, and an unspoken reminder that Michael's life was more than the scandals, more than the spectacle, more than the performances that consumed him. In that space, his humanity was preserved, layered and fragile, waiting only for those willing to see it. It was not just about what he left behind, but about what he managed to keep hidden until the end. And so it remains, sealed once more, not because it is forgotten, but because it is understood. Because some stories are too precious to be scattered. If you found the secrets Michael Jackson kept, even from the world, would you reveal them or let them rest? Tell us what you'd do in the comments below.